The baby's cry pierced through the mountain silence like a knife, and Vincent Quade knew before he even reached the collapsed wagon that someone was dying or already dead. He had been tracking elk through the Nevada wilderness near Las Vegas when he spotted the overturned wagon at the bottom of a ravine, its wheels still spinning slowly in the hot September sun of 1878. Vincent urged his horse down the treacherous slope, his muscular frame tense with urgency. His long, dark hair whipped behind him as he descended, and his powerful arms gripped the reins with practiced ease. The mountains he called home had taught him to move quickly when life hung in the balance. When he reached the wreckage, he found her immediately. A young woman, no more than 23 years old, lay pinned beneath part of the wagon's frame. Her auburn hair was matted with blood, and her face was pale as death itself. But her green eyes were open, filled with terror and desperate pleading as she looked toward the crying infant a few feet away, miraculously thrown clear of the worst of the destruction. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "My baby, Teresa, please." Vincent dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the rocky ground hard. He assessed the situation with the quick judgment of a man who had survived alone in these mountains for the past 6 years. The woman was trapped, crushed, and from the angle of the wagon and the blood pooling beneath her, he knew she would not survive even if he could free her. "I will get your baby," he said, his deep voice steady and sure. He moved to the infant first, scooping up the tiny girl wrapped in blood-stained blankets. She could not have been more than 6 months old, with wisps of auburn hair like her mother's and eyes that were trying to focus on his bearded face even as she wailed. He brought the baby to her mother, kneeling beside the dying woman. Up close, he could see she had been beautiful before this tragedy, with delicate features and a determined set to her jaw even now as death approached. "Teresa," the woman breathed, managing to lift one trembling hand to touch her daughter's face. "My sweet girl." Her eyes moved to Vincent's face, searching, measuring. Whatever she saw there seemed to give her peace. "I am Tabitha Anderson, my husband. He died 3 weeks ago, cholera. I was trying to reach my sister in California." "Save your strength," Vincent said, though he knew it was futile. "No time," Tabitha whispered. "No time left, please. I see you are a good man. Your eyes, kind eyes, will you take her? Will you protect her? She has no one else." "No one." Vincent looked down at the baby in his arms, at her red face and tiny fists, and something inside his chest cracked open. He had left civilization behind after losing his own family to violence, choosing the solitude of the mountains over the pain of human connection. But this child needed him. This dying mother was begging him with her last breaths. "I will protect her with my life," he said. "I give you my word." Tabitha's face relaxed and a small smile crossed her lips. "Thank you. Her full name is Teresa Marie Anderson. She was born March 15th. She likes to be rocked. Her voice faded, her eyes glazing over. With a final shuddering breath, Tabitha Anderson died there in the Nevada dust, her hand still reaching toward her daughter. Vincent sat for a long moment, the baby quieting in his strong arms before he moved. He could not bury Tabitha properly alone, not with the infant to care for and the sun beginning its descent. He gathered what supplies had survived the crash, loading them onto his horse along with a leather satchel that contained papers, a few photographs, and a small amount of money. Then he wrapped Tabitha's body as best he could and said a prayer over her, promising to return with help to give her a proper burial. The baby, Teresa, began to cry again as he mounted his horse, this time with a desperate hunger that Vincent recognized even without experience as a father. He had been a father once, 6 years ago, before the raid that had taken his wife and infant son. The memory was a wound that had never healed, but now this child needed him, and he would not fail her as he had failed to protect his own family. He rode hard toward the small settlement that clung to the edge of the mountain territory, a ramshackle collection of buildings that served as a trading post and way station. As he rode, he talked to Teresa in his deep, rumbling voice, telling her she was safe now, that he would take care of her. She seemed to respond to his voice, her crying subsiding to whimpers. By the time he reached the settlement 3 hours later, Teresa was wailing with genuine hunger, and Vincent's shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cooling evening air. He dismounted outside the only building with lights still burning, a combination general store and boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Hattie Chen, whose Chinese mother and American father had left her this small enterprise at the edge of nowhere. Vincent burst through the door, and Hattie looked up from her ledger, her eyes widening at the sight of the mountain man with a screaming infant. "Vincent Quade, what in heaven's name?" she exclaimed, hurrying around the counter. Hattie was in her 50s, practical and kind, one of the few people Vincent still trusted enough to trade with regularly. The mother died. "Wagon accident in the North Ravine," he said quickly. "The baby needs milk, needs food. I do not know what to do." Hattie's expression shifted from shock to compassion, and she immediately took charge. "Give her here. Poor little mite, come into the back." Over the next hour, Hattie showed Vincent how to feed Teresa with milk from a goat they kept behind the store, warming it carefully and using a clean cloth to let the baby suck. Teresa drank greedily, her tiny hands grasping at Vincent's large, calloused fingers. He watched in wonder as color returned to her cheeks. "You planning to keep her?" Hattie asked directly, her dark eyes studying Vincent's face. "I gave the mother my word," Vincent said. "I will raise her." "A baby is not a wounded animal you can nurse back to health and release, Vincent. She will need constant care, feeding every few hours, day and night, cleaning, protecting, teaching. It is not a life for a mountain man." "Then I will learn," Vincent said firmly, his jaw set in a way that told Hattie argument was useless. She sighed but nodded. "Then you will need supplies. Lots of them. And you will need to come down from that mountain cabin of yours more often. A baby needs more than one person's company." Over the next few days, Vincent did come down from his mountain sanctuary more often than he had in years. Hattie taught him everything she knew about caring for an infant, though she admitted her own children were long grown. He purchased or traded for what Teresa needed: blankets, clothing, more cloth for feeding, a wooden cradle that a local carpenter fashioned quickly. He also kept his promise to Tabitha, leading a burial party back to the ravine. They laid her to rest in the small cemetery behind the settlement's church, and Vincent paid for a simple wooden cross that read, "Tabitha Anderson, beloved mother, 1855–1878. He stood at the grave with Teresa bundled against his broad chest in a sling Hattie had shown him how to make, and he made another silent promise that he would tell her daughter about her when Teresa was old enough to understand. Then he returned to his cabin in the mountains, and his life transformed completely. The cabin Vincent had built with his own hands 5 years earlier had been sufficient for a solitary man who spent most of his time hunting and trapping. It was sturdy, with a stone fireplace and thick log walls that kept out the worst of the winter cold. But it was small, just one room, and it was not prepared for an infant. Teresa cried through that first night in her new home, and Vincent paced the floor with her, rocking her as her mother had said she liked, singing old songs in his deep voice that his own mother had sung to him decades ago in Missouri. His powerful arms were gentle despite their strength, cradling the tiny baby as if she were made of spun glass. In the morning, exhausted but determined, he began to make changes. He built a better cradle, this one with rockers that he could push with his foot while he worked at preparing food or maintaining his gear. He hung dried herbs from the rafters that Hattie said would help keep insects away. He cleaned every corner of the cabin until it shone, knowing that babies needed cleanliness to stay healthy. Teresa needed feeding every few hours, and at first, Vincent worried constantly that he was doing it wrong. But she grew nonetheless, her little body filling out, her eyes growing more alert and focused. She began to recognize him, her face lighting up when he leaned over her cradle in the morning, and that simple response made his scarred heart swell with emotions he had thought dead. The autumn passed in a blur of new routines. Vincent still hunted and trapped, but now he did so with Teresa strapped to his chest in the sling. He could not leave her alone, and so she came with him into the forest, her wide eyes watching the play of light through the pine branches, her little ears hearing the calls of birds and the rustle of wind through grass. He talked to her constantly, telling her the names of plants and animals, describing the world she was too young to understand, but that he wanted her to hear about nonetheless in his voice. When winter came early to the mountains, Vincent made the journey down to the settlement more frequently. The trip took 3 hours on horseback, but he made it every week, knowing that Hattie's advice and Teresa's need for supplies were more important than his preference for solitude. It was during one of these December trips, with snow beginning to fall and Teresa bundled warmly against his chest, that he encountered the woman who would change everything once again. Vincent had just finished loading supplies onto his pack horse when he heard shouting from the far end of the settlement's single street. A crowd had gathered, and he could see a stagecoach stopped at an awkward angle, one wheel clearly broken. Passengers were climbing out, their faces showing irritation and discomfort after what had obviously been a rough journey. He was about to turn away, uninterested in the dramas of travelers, when he saw her. She was struggling with a heavy trunk, trying to lift it down from the coach's roof by herself, while the driver argued with another passenger about payment. She was young, perhaps 21 or 22, with honey-colored hair pulled back in a practical bun and a determined expression on her face. She wore a simple traveling dress in dark blue, and even from a distance, Vincent could see the intelligence in her eyes and the stubborn set to her jaw. The trunk began to slip, too heavy for her to manage alone, and without thinking, Vincent crossed the street in long strides. He reached up with one powerful arm, steadying the trunk easily while keeping his other arm secure around Teresa in her sling. The young woman looked down at him, surprised, and then her eyes widened as she saw the baby. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and educated with an Eastern accent. "I apologize for the struggle. The driver was supposed to help, but as you can see—" "It is no trouble," Vincent said, lifting the trunk down with ease and setting it on the ground. "Are you staying in the settlement? If the stage is repaired quickly, no. If not, I suppose I must." She climbed down from the coach with more grace than most of the other passengers had managed, and up close, Vincent could see that her eyes were a striking golden-brown color like honey held up to sunlight. She looked at Teresa, and her entire face softened. "Oh, what a beautiful baby! How old?" 7 months, near enough," Vincent said. "Her name is Teresa." "And yours?" Vincent Quade. "Thea Ashford," she said, extending her hand in a gesture that was bold for a woman meeting a strange man in the wilderness. Vincent shook it carefully, aware of how small her hand was in his large, calloused palm, and equally aware of the spark he felt at the touch. "You are traveling alone?" he asked, noting that none of the other passengers seemed connected to her. Thea's expression tightened slightly. "I am." I am a teacher, heading to Sacramento to take a position at a girls' school there. I was meant to arrive 2 weeks ago, but there have been delays upon delays." Before Vincent could respond, the stagecoach driver shouted out, "Stage is broken good. Won't be fixed until tomorrow at earliest, maybe longer. You all need lodging, see Mrs. Chen at the store." Thea sighed, but there was humor in it. "Well, that answers that question. I suppose I should secure a room before everyone else has the same idea." "Mrs. Chen's establishment is small," Vincent said. "Come, I will introduce you. She is a friend." He picked up Thea's heavy trunk with his free hand as if it weighed nothing, and Thea followed him across the muddy street to Hattie's store. She kept glancing at him curiously, taking in his mountain man appearance. The long dark hair, the full beard, the heavily muscled frame clad in buckskin and wool, the confident way he moved despite carrying both a baby and her trunk. Hattie was indeed overwhelmed with the sudden influx of stranded passengers, but when she saw Vincent, her face cleared. "Vincent, thank goodness. And who is this?" "Miss Thea Ashford, a teacher bound for Sacramento," Vincent said. "She needs a room." Hattie looked at Thea appraisingly and seemed to approve of what she saw. "I have one small room left, but I should warn you, it is truly small, more of a closet, honestly." "I will take it gratefully," Thea said. "I have slept in far worse on this journey." While Hattie showed Thea to her room, Vincent waited with Teresa, who had begun to fuss. He was preparing to feed her when Thea returned, and she watched with undisguised curiosity as he settled into a chair and carefully began the process of warming goat's milk and feeding the baby with a cloth. "You are her father?" Thea asked, sitting across from him. "I am now," Vincent said. "Her mother died in a wagon accident 3 months ago. She asked me to take Teresa, and I did." Thea's eyes widened. "That is incredibly kind of you. It is necessary," Vincent said simply. "She had no one else." "Still, most men would not." Thea trailed off, watching as Teresa drank hungrily, her tiny hand wrapped around Vincent's thick finger. "You are very good with her." "I am learning," Vincent admitted. "It is not easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is." They talked while Teresa fed, and Vincent found himself enjoying the conversation more than he had expected. Thea was intelligent and well-read, with strong opinions about education and women's rights that would have scandalized many people in proper society. She told him about growing up in Boston, about losing both her parents to influenza, about deciding to go west to make her own way in the world. "And you?" she asked eventually. "How did a mountain man come to be in Nevada?" Vincent's face darkened slightly, but he answered. "I came west after the war, found these mountains and found peace in them, or as much peace as a man can find." Thea seemed to sense the pain behind his words and did not push further. Instead, she asked about Teresa, about caring for a baby in the wilderness, and Vincent found himself describing his daily life in detail he had not shared with anyone, not even Hattie. When Teresa finished feeding and fell asleep against his broad chest, Thea smiled. "She trusts you completely. You can see it in how she relaxes with you." "She is a good baby," Vincent said softly, stroking Teresa's fine hair with one gentle finger. "Strong like her mother." The stage repairs took 3 days, not 1, and during that time, Vincent found himself lingering in the settlement far longer than necessary. He told himself it was for Teresa's sake, that the cabin was cold and they had supplies to purchase anyway. But the truth was that he wanted to see Thea, wanted to talk with her, wanted to experience the way his heart lifted when she smiled. Thea seemed equally drawn to him. She spent hours with him and Teresa, helping to care for the baby and clearly delighted by the experience. She told Vincent she had always wanted children of her own someday, though as an unmarried teacher, Such dreams seemed distant. On the second evening, when Teresa was asleep and they sat by the fire in Hattie's common room, Thea asked the question Vincent had been dreading. What will you do when Teresa is older? She will need schooling, social interaction with other children, the company of women to teach her things a father cannot. I know, Vincent said heavily. I think about it often, but she is still so small. I have time to determine the answer. You do, Thea agreed. But Vincent, you should know that what you are doing for her, it is remarkable. She is lucky to have you. Vincent looked at her across the firelight, at her kind eyes and gentle smile, and felt something shift in his chest. Perhaps I am the lucky one. She gave me a reason to live again, to care about something beyond mere survival. Thea held his gaze for a long moment, and Vincent saw his own attraction reflected in her eyes. But she was a proper Eastern woman with a job waiting in Sacramento, and he was a mountain man with a baby and a past full of ghosts. The distance between them was not just physical but a matter of entirely different worlds. The morning the stage was finally repaired, Vincent helped load Thea's trunk onto it personally. Teresa was strapped to his chest, awake and alert, watching everything with her bright eyes. Thea bent to kiss the baby's forehead, and Vincent saw tears shining in her eyes. I will miss you both, she said softly. This has been the most unexpectedly wonderful delay of my entire journey. I am glad the stage broke down, Vincent admitted, his deep voice rough with emotion. I am glad I met you, Thea Ashford, and I you, Vincent Quade. She hesitated, then added, if you are ever in Sacramento, the school is called Miss Penelope's Academy for Young Ladies. Anyone in the city can direct you to it. I will remember, Vincent promised, though they both knew the chances of him traveling to California were slim. Thea climbed into the stage, and Vincent stood watching as it pulled away, feeling a hollowness in his chest that had nothing to do with his old grief, and everything to do with watching this remarkable woman disappear from his life. Hattie appeared beside him, looking knowing. That one got under your skin. She is going to California to teach, Vincent said. California is not another world, Vincent. It is just across the border. It might as well be another world for a man like me, Hattie snorted. A man like you. You mean a good man, a strong man, a man capable of raising a baby alone in the wilderness. Oh yes, what woman would want such a man? Vincent looked down at her, and despite his sadness, he almost smiled. You are mocking me. I am telling you that you are a fool if you let her go without even trying, but I suppose you will have to learn that in your own time. She patted his arm. Come inside. I made stew, and you look like you need feeding before you head back up your mountain. Winter deepened, and Vincent threw himself into the routines of caring for Teresa. She was growing fast now, becoming more interactive, laughing at his faces and sounds, reaching for his beard with her tiny hands. The cabin felt less empty with her in it, less like a hermit's refuge and more like a home. But he thought about Thea constantly. He thought about her smile, her intelligence, the way she had looked at Teresa with such natural affection. He thought about her hands, small and soft but capable. He thought about the life she was building in Sacramento, teaching young women to be educated and independent, and he wondered if she ever thought about the mountain man and his baby. When spring began to touch the high country in March, turning the snow to slush and bringing the first green shoots pushing through the frozen ground, Vincent made a decision. Teresa's first birthday was approaching on the 15th. She deserved more than just her adoptive father to celebrate with. She deserved cake and presents and joy, things Vincent could not provide alone in the wilderness. More than that, Vincent admitted to himself as he began to plan, he needed to see Thea again. He needed to know if what he had felt during those 3 days in December had been real or just loneliness and circumstance. He needed to know if she had felt it too. Hattie was delighted when he told her his plan. About time you came to your senses. Sacramento is only a week's journey, less if you push hard. I will help you prepare. She outfitted him with his best clothes, which admittedly were still rough compared to city standards, but at least were clean and well maintained. She showed him how to pack supplies for Teresa for a long journey, including a better traveling sling and a small tent that would keep them both dry and warm at night. She even wrote out a letter of introduction to Miss Penelope's academy, explaining that Vincent was a respected man and friend, just in case the school was wary of mountain men appearing on their doorstep. Vincent set out in early April when the passes were clear enough to travel, but before the worst of the spring storms. Teresa was nearly a year old now, a healthy, happy baby who loved being carried against his chest, watching the world go by. She babbled constantly in her nonsense language, and Vincent talked back to her, pointing out birds and trees and distant mountains. The journey to Sacramento took him through the heart of the Sierra Nevada, through forests of towering pines and meadows just beginning to bloom with wildflowers. They traveled through small mining towns and settlements, and everywhere they went, people stared at the huge mountain man with the baby strapped to his chest. Some looked scandalized, some amused, some touched. Vincent ignored all of it, focused on his goal. He arrived in Sacramento on a warm April afternoon, and the city was like nothing Teresa had ever experienced. She clung to Vincent, overwhelmed by the noise and crowds, the horses and wagons, the sheer mass of humanity. Vincent himself felt uncomfortable after so long in the wilderness, but he steeled himself and asked directions to Miss Penelope's academy. The school was a large, elegant building on the edge of the city, surrounded by gardens that were carefully maintained. Vincent stood outside the gates for a long moment, suddenly uncertain. What if Thea did not want to see him? What if she had moved on, found someone else, built a life that had no room for a mountain man and his adopted daughter, but he had come this far. He would not turn back now. He walked through the gates and up to the main door, Teresa quiet now in his arms, sensing his tension. He knocked, and a severe-looking older woman in black answered, her eyes widening at the sight of him. "May I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting that help would likely involve directing him away from the school. "I am looking for Miss Thea Ashford," Vincent said, keeping his voice calm and polite. "I am an old friend. My name is Vincent Quade." The woman's expression did not soften. "Miss Ashford is teaching at the moment. If you would care to leave a message." "Vincent!" He looked past the woman to see Thea standing in the hallway behind her, a slate in her hands and chalk dust on her fingers. Her honey-colored hair was pinned up in a more severe style than she had worn in Nevada, and she wore a high-necked dress in dark green. But her eyes were the same, and they were wide with shock and unmistakable joy. "Vincent and Teresa." She hurried forward, and the severe woman stepped aside, clearly confused by her colleague's reaction. Thea stopped just in front of him, drinking in the sight of them both. "I cannot believe you are here. I never thought I would see you again." "May I speak with you?" Vincent asked. "I have come a long way." "Of course. Yes, of course." Thea turned to the older woman. "Miss Penelope, this is Mr. Quade, a friend from Nevada. Would it be acceptable if I took an early break to speak with him in the garden?" Miss Penelope looked like she wanted to refuse, but something in Thea's face made her relent. "Half an hour, Miss Ashford. You have the senior literature class after lunch." "Thank you." Thea led Vincent through the building and out into the beautiful garden behind it, away from curious eyes. The moment they were alone, she reached out and touched his arm as if needing to confirm he was real. "You are truly here. I cannot believe it. How long has it been?" "4 months," Vincent said. "A long winter." "The longest of my life," Thea admitted. She looked at Teresa, who was staring at her with recognition dawning on her small face. "Oh, she has grown so much. She is beautiful, Vincent. May I?" Vincent carefully transferred Teresa to Thea's arms, and the baby went willingly, grabbing at Thea's hair and babbling happily. Thea laughed, the sound like music, and Vincent felt his heart constrict with how right it looked to see her holding his daughter. "She is walking yet?" Thea asked. "Not yet, but soon, I think. She pulls herself up on everything in the cabin." Vincent paused, then said what he had come to say. "Thea, I have thought about you every day since you left. I told myself I was a fool, that you had your life here and I had mine in the mountains, but I could not stop thinking about you. About the way you smiled at Teresa, the way you talked about books and ideas, the way you made me feel like I was not just a hermit hiding from the world but a man with something to offer." Thea's eyes filled with tears. "I thought about you too, constantly. I would lie awake at night wondering how you both were, if Teresa was thriving, if you were lonely. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that we had only known each other for 3 days, but my heart did not care about logic. 3 days was enough to know you are remarkable," Vincent said. "Enough to know that I have not felt this way about anyone since my wife died 6 years ago. I did not think I could feel this way again." "You were married before?" Thea asked gently. "Yes. She and our infant son were killed in a raid. I came west to escape the pain, and I hid in the mountains because that was easier than facing the world. But Teresa brought me back to life, and you. Thea, you made me realize that I want more than just survival. I want a life, a real life with people I love in it." Thea was crying now, tears streaming down her face while Teresa patted at her cheeks curiously. "I want that too, I want it so much. But Vincent, my life is here. My job, my students, and your life is in the mountains. How can we possibly make this work?" Vincent took a deep breath. "I do not have all the answers, but I know that the mountains are not the only place I can be happy. When I was younger, before the war, I wanted to build a ranch, raise horses, have a family and a home. I gave up on that dream after the tragedy, but it is still inside me. I could build that life near a town, somewhere Teresa could go to school and have friends, somewhere you could teach if you wanted to or do whatever made you happy. You would leave the mountains for me, for us. I would. The mountains gave me peace when I needed it, but they are not where I belong forever. I belong where my family is. And Thea, I want you to be part of that family if you will have us." Thea handed Teresa back to Vincent and then stepped close to him, reaching up to touch his bearded face with her small hand. "I have wanted that since I met you, even when I told myself it was impossible. Yes, Vincent. Yes to all of it." Vincent bent his head and kissed her, a gentle, searching kiss that quickly deepened as 4 months of longing poured into it. Teresa squeaked in protest at being squished between them, and they broke apart, laughing. "I should probably speak with Miss Penelope," Thea said, wiping her eyes. "She will not be pleased that I am leaving, but I have enough saved to last several months while we determine where to settle." "You would give up your position, just like that?" "Vincent, I took this position because I needed work and stability. But teaching at a girls' school in Sacramento was never my dream. My dream was always to have a family, children of my own, a husband I loved. I became a teacher because I thought that dream was impossible for an orphan with no prospects. But you are giving me that dream. Of course I will take it." Over the next weeks, they planned their future together. Thea gave her notice at the school, and while Miss Penelope was disappointed, she could not help but be touched by the love story unfolding before her. Vincent stayed in Sacramento, taking odd jobs to pay for lodging and spending every free moment with Thea and Teresa. They talked about where to settle, eventually deciding on a town called Reno, also in Nevada but in the valley rather than the mountains. It was growing quickly with the railroad, large enough to have a real school and society but still close to the wild lands Vincent loved. They could build a ranch there, raise horses and cattle, give Teresa siblings and a real home. But first, there was something Vincent needed to do. One evening in early May, as they sat in a park with Teresa playing in the grass between them, Vincent pulled out a small box from his pocket. It contained a simple gold ring that he had purchased with the last of his saved money, engraved on the inside with their initials and the date. "Thea Ashford," he said, his deep voice rough with emotion. "You have given me back my life, my hope, my dreams. You have shown me that it is possible to love again, to trust again, to build something beautiful from grief and loneliness. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and Teresa's mother?" Thea's answer was to throw herself into his arms, kissing him while Teresa clapped her little hands and laughed at the display. "Yes, yes, of course I will marry you." They were married in Sacramento in June, a simple ceremony attended by Thea's fellow teachers and a few friends Vincent had made during his stay. Teresa, now 14 months old and taking her first wobbling steps, served as their flower girl, scattering petals everywhere and stealing the show completely. Vincent wore a new suit that felt strange and constricting, and Thea wore a simple white dress that made her look like an angel. When Vincent kissed his bride, he felt the final pieces of his broken heart knit back together. Thea was his, Teresa was his, and together they would build a new life. They traveled to Reno that summer, with all of Thea's possessions and Teresa in a proper wagon this time, not risking the kind of accident that had killed Tabitha. Vincent found land on the outskirts of town, good grazing land with water access, and a view of the mountains that still called to his soul. He built a house with his own hands, this time a real house with multiple rooms, a covered porch, and a separate building for a schoolroom because Thea wanted to teach local children who had no other options. Teresa thrived in their new home. By the time she turned 2, she was running everywhere, chattering in full sentences, and showing signs of her mother Tabitha's determination and intelligence. Thea loved her with the fierce devotion of a mother, and Teresa called her mama without hesitation or confusion. Vincent told her stories about her birth mother, showing her the one photograph he had saved from the wagon wreck, making sure she knew that Tabitha had loved her and died protecting her. The ranch grew as Vincent had dreamed. He started with a few horses, then more, building a reputation for training quality animals. Thea did start her small school, teaching the children of ranchers and farmers who lived too far from town for the regular school. She loved the work, and the freedom it gave her to teach as she thought best, without the constraints of Miss Penelope's rigid curriculum. And their family grew as well. In the spring of 1880, Thea gave birth to a son they named Victor, a healthy baby boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's golden eyes. Vincent held his son in his huge, gentle hands and wept, healing another piece of the past. This time, he would see his son grow up. This time, there would be no tragedy. Teresa was enchanted with her baby brother, helping Thea care for him with the seriousness of a child playing at being grown up. Vincent watched his daughter with her brother and felt such overwhelming love that sometimes he could hardly breathe with it. 2 years later, another daughter arrived, a tiny, fierce little thing they named Violet. And 2 years after that, twin boys, Thomas and Timothy, who kept the whole household in chaos with their mischief. The house that Vincent had built expanded over the years, room added after room as the family grew. The ranch prospered, becoming well known throughout Nevada for quality horses. Thea's school also grew, eventually becoming a proper building with an assistant teacher as more families settled in the area. Through it all, Vincent never forgot the promise he had made to a dying woman in a Nevada ravine. He raised Teresa with as much love and dedication as he gave his biological children, and she never felt like anything less than his true daughter. She grew into a beautiful, intelligent young woman with her birth mother's auburn hair and determination, and her adoptive father's strength and kindness. On Teresa's 18th birthday in 1896, Vincent took her to the small cemetery where Tabitha was buried. He had maintained the grave over the years, making sure it was always neat and decorated with flowers. Teresa stood before her birth mother's headstone, holding a bouquet of wildflowers, and Vincent stood beside her with his hand on her shoulder. "She would be so proud of you," Vincent said quietly. "You are everything she hoped you would be: strong, kind, educated, ready to face the world." Teresa leaned against her father, this huge, gentle man who had given her everything. "I am proud to be your daughter. You and Mama Thea gave me the most wonderful life. I wish I could have known her, my birth mother, but I know she is watching over us." "She is," Vincent agreed. "And she is grateful that you have been loved and protected and cherished. That was all she wanted for you." They stood in silence for a while, and then Teresa said, "Papa, there is something I want to talk to you about. Robert has asked permission to court me." Vincent smiled, though his heart ached a little at how fast his daughter had grown up. Robert was the son of a neighboring rancher, a good young man with a kind heart and ambitions to study law. "And what did you say?" "I said he had to ask you first," Teresa said with a grin. "But I hope you will say yes. I care for him very much." "Then I will say yes," Vincent said, "but he had better treat you well, or he will answer to me." Teresa laughed and hugged her father tightly. "He knows. Everyone in the territory knows not to cross Vincent Quade when it comes to his family." Over the next years, Vincent and Thea watched all their children grow and flourish. Teresa married Robert and moved to Carson City, where he set up his law practice, and they gave Vincent and Thea their first grandchildren. Victor took over running the ranch, showing his father's talent with horses and his mother's head for business. Violet became a teacher like her mother, opening a school in a new mining town. The twins, predictably, went into business together, starting a freight company that served the growing communities of Nevada. Vincent and Thea grew older together, their hair graying, their bodies slowing, but their love never dimming. They sat together on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains Vincent had once called home, and they marveled at the family they had built from tragedy and chance. "You ever regret leaving the mountains?" Thea asked one evening when they were both in their 60s. Vincent took her hand, noting how perfectly it still fit in his despite the years. "Not for one moment. The mountains gave me peace when I needed it, but you gave me life. You and Teresa and all our children. That is worth more than all the solitude in the world." "I never thought I would end up on a ranch in Nevada, married to a mountain man," Thea said with a smile, "but I cannot imagine any other life now." "Nor can I," Vincent said. He pulled her close, and they sat together in the comfortable silence of two people who had shared decades of love and life. When Teresa came to visit with her children the following week, Vincent told her the whole story again, as he always did, sitting on the porch with his grandchildren playing at his feet. He told them about finding their grandmother after the wagon accident, about the promise he made to a dying woman, about carrying a baby through the wilderness and learning to be a father again. "You saved me as much as I saved you," he told Teresa, his voice deep and warm. You gave me a reason to live, to love, to hope again. Everything good in my life came from the moment I heard your cry in that ravine." Teresa, now a mother herself, understood this in a way she had not as a child. She kissed her father's weathered cheek. "And everything good in my life came from you saying yes to a dying woman's request. You could have left me there, found someone else to take me, placed me in an orphanage. But you kept your word, and you loved me with everything you had. That is the greatest gift anyone could give." As the sun set over the Nevada landscape that evening, Vincent looked around at his family. All of them gathered together, and felt complete peace. He had lost so much in his life, but he had gained even more. He had been given a second chance at love, at fatherhood, at happiness, and he had seized it with both hands. The mountain man who had once hidden from the world had become a man who embraced it fully, and he would not change a single moment of the journey that had brought him here. Years continued to pass in the gentle rhythm of a life well lived. Vincent and Thea celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch that Vincent had built with his own hands had become a legacy, a place where family gathered for holidays and celebrations, where the next generation learned about hard work and love and keeping promises. Vincent's hair and beard had gone completely white, and his powerful frame had bent slightly with age, but his eyes were still sharp and kind, and his love for his family never wavered. Thea, her honey-colored hair now silver, remained as sharp and dedicated as ever, still teaching occasionally when a child in the area needed help with reading or mathematics. Teresa's visits became even more precious as the years went on. She and Robert had built a good life in Carson City, where he had become a respected judge. Their 4 children were all grown now, with families of their own, but Teresa made sure to visit her parents regularly, bringing whichever grandchildren and great-grandchildren could make the journey. On one such visit, when Teresa was in her mid-40s and Vincent was approaching 75, they took a ride together across the ranch land, just the two of them. Teresa had learned to ride from her father when she was barely big enough to sit a horse, and even now, decades later, they moved in comfortable synchronization across the Nevada landscape. They stopped at a high point that overlooked the ranch, the town of Reno visible in the distance, the mountains beyond still calling with their wild beauty. Vincent dismounted with more difficulty than he once had, but he still moved with purpose. Teresa joined him, and they stood together looking at the life he had built. "I have been thinking about your birth mother," Vincent said quietly. "About that day in the ravine, about the choice I made. I want you to know that it was the easiest decision I ever made. The moment I looked into your infant face, I knew you were meant to be mine." "I know, Papa," Teresa said, linking her arm through his. "You have shown me that every day of my life. But there is more I want to say," Vincent continued. "When I lost my first wife and son, I thought my life was over. I thought the best I could do was survive, exist without truly living. I was wrong. You taught me that we can heal from even the deepest wounds, that love can find us in the most unexpected places, that family is not just blood but choice and commitment and showing up every day." Teresa felt tears streaming down her face. "You taught me the same things. You taught me what a father should be, what a man should be. You taught me that promises matter, that integrity matters, that love is not just a feeling but an action we choose again and again." They stood together in silence for a while, and then Teresa said, "I want you to know that I have told my children the whole story, and they have told their children. The story of how a mountain man heard a baby's cry and changed the course of multiple lives. It is our family's foundation story, the thing that makes us who we are. Vincent looked at his daughter, this remarkable woman who had once been a helpless infant in his arms, and felt overwhelming gratitude. "Thank you for letting me be your father. It has been the greatest honor of my life." "Thank you for choosing me," Teresa replied, "for keeping your promise to my mother, for giving me a life full of love and opportunity and family. I could not have asked for anything more." They rode back to the ranch together as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The house that Vincent had built was lit up with lamps, full of family and laughter. And as they approached, Vincent could see Thea standing on the porch, waiting for them with that smile he had loved for more than 4 decades. This was his legacy, he thought. Not just the land or the ranch or the horses, but this family that had sprung from a promise made to a dying woman, and a choice to love when love seemed impossible. This was what it meant to live fully, to embrace second chances, to build something beautiful from the ruins of grief. As Vincent and Teresa reached the house, children ran out to greet them, calling for Grandpa and Grandmother, begging for stories and attention. Vincent dismounted and scooped up his youngest great-grandchild, a little girl named Tabitha after Teresa's birth mother, and carried her into the house, surrounded by family and love and life. That night, after everyone had eaten and the house had finally quieted, Vincent sat with Thea on their bed, holding her hand as they had done for thousands of nights before. "You remember the day I appeared at your school in Sacramento?" he asked. Thea laughed softly. "I thought I was seeing a vision. I could not believe you had traveled all that way to find me." "Best journey I ever made," Vincent said. "Well, second best. The best was when I rode down into that ravine and heard Teresa crying." "2 journeys that changed everything," Thea agreed. She leaned her head on his shoulder and they sat together in the comfortable peace of a lifetime shared. "We built something good, did we not?" "We built something magnificent," Vincent corrected. "A family, a home, a life. Everything I thought I had lost forever I found again. And it was worth every moment of pain to get here." They fell asleep that night as they had for decades, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that they had loved well and lived fully. Vincent Quade lived to see his 80th birthday, celebrated with a party that brought family from across Nevada and California. He was still strong enough to hold his great-great-grandchildren, still sharp enough to tell the old stories, still loving enough to make everyone feel cherished and valued. When he finally passed, peacefully in his sleep with Thea beside him, the entire territory mourned. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched. Students Thea had taught, horses he had trained, neighbors he had helped, and of course, the vast extended family that had grown from one promise kept to a dying woman. Teresa stood at her father's grave, now a woman in her 60s, and she thought about the full circle of life. She had started in tragedy, with her birth mother dying in a ravine, but she had been given the gift of a second father who had loved her unconditionally. She had grown up surrounded by love, had built her own family, had passed on the legacy of integrity and commitment that Vincent had modeled. As she placed flowers on his grave, Teresa whispered, "Thank you, Papa, for everything. For keeping your promise, for showing me what love looks like, for building a family that will carry on your legacy for generations. Rest well, knowing you lived a life that mattered." Thea lived for 5 more years after Vincent's death, surrounded by family and never wanting for company. She passed away quietly in the same house Vincent had built, in the same bed they had shared for half a century, and she was buried beside him in the family plot that overlooked the ranch they had created together. The ranch itself continued for generations, passed down through the family, each generation adding their own contributions but never forgetting the foundation. The story of how it all began was told and retold, becoming a legend in the family. How a mountain man named Vincent Quade heard a baby's cry in a Nevada ravine and chose to keep a promise that would change countless lives. Teresa's children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren all knew the story. They knew about Tabitha Anderson, who had died protecting her daughter but had chosen well in the man she trusted with Teresa's life. They knew about Vincent, who had lost his first family but had found the courage to build a second one. They knew about Thea, who had left her safe life as a teacher to marry a mountain man and build a ranch in the wilderness. They knew about the love that had sustained all of them, the commitment that had built something lasting, the promise that had been kept. And they passed the story on to their children, ensuring that Vincent's legacy lived on not just in land or wealth, but in values and love, and the understanding that family is built through choice and dedication as much as through blood. In the family cemetery on the ranch, 3 headstones stood together. Vincent Quade, 1823–1903, beloved husband and father. Thea Quade, 1857–1908, beloved wife and mother. And nearby, carefully maintained, the smaller stone that had been moved from the settlement cemetery years before. Tabitha Anderson, 1855–1878, beloved mother. Flowers were always fresh on all 3 graves, placed there by descendants who understood that their family had been built from tragedy and promise, from love and courage, from a mountain man who had heard a baby's cry and had chosen to answer it with his whole heart. The story of Vincent and Thea and Teresa became a testament to the power of love to heal, to the importance of keeping promises, to the way family can be created by choice as much as by birth. It was a story of the Wild West, of hard land and harder times, but also of hope and second chances and the enduring strength of the human heart. And it was a story with a true ending, not in death but in the legacy that lived on. A sprawling family that knew where they came from and what values they were meant to uphold. A ranch that stood as a physical monument to what could be built from commitment and hard work. And a love story that proved that even in the wildest places and the hardest times, love could not only survive but flourish. The mountain man who had once hidden from life in the Nevada wilderness had instead created a life so full and rich that its effects rippled forward through time, touching people who would never meet him but would still benefit from the choice he made on that September day in 1878 when he rode down into a ravine and found a baby crying beside her dying mother. He had carried that baby when she was too weak, when she had no one else, when the world seemed determined to leave her motherless and alone. And in doing so, he had become the father she needed most in life, not just in her infancy but throughout all her years, showing her what it meant to be loved unconditionally, to be valued completely, to be cherished always. And that, in the end, was the truest measure of Vincent Quade's life, not what he had survived or achieved, but how completely he had loved and been loved in return. It was a legacy that would never fade, a story that would never end, because it lived on in every descendant who carried his values forward and in the love that continued to bind the family together across all the years to come.